Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gaffer and Gear. Today it's another gear review, but this time it's something slightly different. In the past, a lot of manufacturers have sent me RGB WW units claiming that they are as bright as an RE Sky panel. The difference today is somebody has actually delivered. This is the Thunder One by newcomer to the market, Chromatech. Now this unit actually is brighter than a Sky Panel RES60. The unit boasts a CCT mode that's color tunable from 2700 all the way up to 10,000 Kelvin with a plus minus green, a very simple to use graphic interface, and all the RGB modes you would expect, including hue, saturation, intensity mode. It boasts a gels library with Lee and Roscoe gels, a very comprehensive library featuring hundreds of gels. You've got source matching, and also you have special effects. So let's delve into it and have a look. Okay, so before we get into the review, number one, a very big thank you to Technical Art Solutions who managed to get this into the country for us to have a look at. Second thing I've got to mention is that these units are also available in a Thunder Light, which is half the size, and I believe they're working on a smaller unit. The next thing I've got to mention is that this is the Thunder One, which is the low-cost version. They also have a Thunder One Pro, which has way higher color rendering than this unit. But let's get on with the review and have a look. All right, so where do I start? Well, here's a good point I have to make straight off the bat. This is the Thunder One. Okay, so if you go to these guys' website, you will see a lot of impressive photometric data, a lot of impressive TLCI scores, things like that. That is the Thunder Pro. Okay, so the difference between the Thunder One, this unit, and the Thunder Pro is the Thunder Pro has red handles and all of this stuff here. That silver is red on the Thunder Pro, and the Thunder Pro has a way better light engine than this unit. This is basically the cost-effective version. So this doesn't have as good a color render. Having said that, it's pretty good. I'd be pretty happy with it. Basically, the best way to describe the color render is if you're happy with a Sky Panel, if you think a Sky Panel's got awesome color render, this would be marginally behind a Sky Panel. Not much in it, but marginally behind. And that's comparing it to, say, a new Sky Panel. So basically one that's just come out of its box. Comparing it to a 3-year-old Sky Panel, if I compared it to mine, this would be probably neck and neck with the Sky Panels, with my good Sky Panels, marginally in front of some of my Sky Panels that have drifted a bit. So, you know, it's more than acceptable color render for most jobs. All right, so what a lot of you are going to want to know is price. Okay, so at the moment there are no prices on these. This is such a new product, they haven't even got the pricing structure figured out yet. So we're pretty much just having a first look at it. What they're sort of estimating is that the Thunder One will be a little bit more than half the price of a Sky Panel S60. That's sort of what they're pushing the price point at, a little bit more than half the price. Now for that you get the unit will come with a case. The case is actually quite big. I wouldn't bother with it. You also get a quality built snap bag, which also has a grid on it. So you do get quite a bit of value. Now, in terms of comparing this to a Sky Panel S60, this unit in tungsten came in at 37% brighter. So that's quite an achievement. The Sky Panels have really sat on the top of on the throne for brightness of LED lights for a very long time. So this is coming in at 37% brighter in tungsten. In daylight set to 5600, this thing comes in at 11% brighter. So it actually does come in brighter than the Sky Panel. It is physically quite big. The unit is roughly 33 by 17 inches on the front. Now to give you some idea of where it fits in size-wise, it is about halfway in between a Sky Panel S60 and a Sky Panel S60 with a snap bag on it. Now one point of difference between this and the Sky Panels is this has its power supply built in. So if you want to use it, basically you just plug in your Nutrix connector and flick the on switch and you're off and running. You can also piggyback power to another light. The disadvantage to this is you've always got the weight of the power supply built into the unit. The unit comes in at 17 kilograms, which is fairly heavy. Now, a Sky Panel is a heavy light with a power supply attached, but if you're running the Sky Panel off batteries, you can disconnect the power supply. So that is one marginal advantage that the Sky Panel has. Now, in terms of running this off batteries, you've only got the one inlet. And one thing I don't like about the inlet is it simply says battery. It doesn't tell you what the voltage is. So my concern with owning these, or if I own some of these, would be sooner or later somebody would probably plug in a 48-volt battery. So the first thing I'll be doing is marking that up with the voltage. So the inlet input voltage for batteries is 24 to 30 volts. Now, the disadvantage that this unit has, just having the one DC inlet, is that DC inlet is for batteries only and only powers the light at 50% brightness. So you can't run this unit at 100% brightness off a battery. Now, in terms of running this thing off a battery, it does have a slide-on plate. So pretty much like the Sky Panels, you can slide a double V-lock system on, run a cable, and you're off and running. Now, if you own Sky Panels already and you're looking to buy some of these because they are really, really price effective, I just want to point something out. Sky Panel accessories do not fit this rail. All right, so let's quickly go over the build. So the first thing to point out is the Perspex is built in. So you can't remove the Perspex. Now that is a huge negative for me. One thing I really love about the Sky Panels, and one reason I went with Sky Panels, was because I could remove the Perspex. So the reason I remove the Perspex is if I'm running it, say, through an Octodone. Okay, so it's going through a softbox, something that's already got a diffuser on the front, I can take the Perspex out and get more firepower. So that is a personal preference of mine, might not affect you at all. So this thing can take accessories. They've got honeycombs they're going to make for it. They've got an intensifier they're going to make for it. They've got snoots they're going to make for it. It's got a huge range of professional accessories. And that is fantastic. A lot of new players to the market make a great light and no accessories. These guys have done a bit of homework and got that sorted out. But the thing I don't like is the accessories slide in from sideways. I absolutely hate that. I like my accessories to drop in. And here's why. Let's say we've got an intensifier, which would be about this big. If I've got a drop-in intensifier, I literally just go like that. Because this thing is slide in, I can't get it in where the light currently is. I don't have enough space here to slide it in. I don't have enough space on that side to slide it in. I have to move the light, find space, slide it in, and then put the light back into position. It is something that irritates me beyond belief, and I don't know why manufacturers do it. Actually, I do know why they do it. They don't get enough feedback from users. So we need to play our part as users and give them feedback. All right, the stirrup is solid as. So this stirrup is going to survive the current apocalypse, and it's probably going to survive the next one. That is rock solid. The next thing I got to say I love about this is decent lock-offs. It's only got the one lock-off on the one side. That is all it needs. That is not going to slip. And a ratchet handle. Love it. So many manufacturers completely stuff up the stirrups and completely stuff up the lock-offs. These guys have got that sorted out. Okay, next things, the build quality is quite strong. What I don't like is the handle. I don't think the handle's going to break anytime soon. I think in 10 years' time this handle's still going to be here, but it just feels cheap and plasticky. You know, like I'll give you a good example is the Sky Panels have plastic handles as well, but they feel really rigid and solid. So it's just a feel thing. I don't know, it's probably nothing, but it's just something I initially looked at and went, yeah, don't like that. Next thing is the inputs. So let's have a look through. So we've got our Nutrix connectors we've talked about. You've got a local area network connection. You've got USB for firmware updates. You've got DMX in and out, and the DMX is proper 5-pin. Now, just very quickly with the DMX, unlike a lot of lights that are new to the market, this thing has professional profiles. Okay, it's not just one channel per slider crap that a lot of manufacturers do. This has really usable profiles, and you can get from their website a download with all the profile data, so you can program your consoles, things like that. Now, in terms of running this thing off something like, say, an Exalux, some of the profiles are very similar to Sky Panel. So you can run this straight away with some sophisticated DMX control off existing technology. The only thing that's sort of different, let's say, with this compared to the Sky Panels is things like the fan settings might be different, but your CCT settings are very similar. Your intensity settings are very similar, other things like that. Now the DMX is very responsive, very smooth on its color transitions, but it is worth noting that it is a little bit jerky on its fade to blacks. Now the next thing I want to talk about is the cooling fans, and they do run a little bit loud. But here's the thing, the light has this massive heatsink, so it doesn't really need the cooling fans. You could quite easily film an interview for 2, 3, possibly even 4 hours with the fans turned off. I've run this unit at full power with the fans turned off on a 35 degrees Celsius day, and it didn't overheat. The unit got very hot up here, but it didn't overheat. And I was deliberately trying to see how long it would take for the unit to overheat as part of my testing regime for this video. So it survived that pretty well. Now, in terms of how loud the fans get, I'm going to turn the fans on at full blast so you can hear how loud the fans are at their loudest. Now in normal operations, with the fans set to automatic, I have never had the fans fire up this loud. Occasionally they'll fire up to this speed, but only for about a minute. Now the maximum power consumption I've recorded off this unit is 440 watts, and that was with the fans running at full speed. Now the last thing to talk about in terms of the electronics is how it dims. The unit dims using direct current dimming. It doesn't use pulse width modulation. So what does that mean? Well, basically, regardless of what you have the dimmer set to, regardless of your frame rate or shutter speed on your camera, you will not get flicker out of this unit. Now, one of the downsides to using direct current dimming is that you can have your color change when you're very, very low on your dimmer. So let's have a look. Okay, so let's start fading down. 90%, 80%, 70%, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20. Still looking pretty good. Okay, now we're getting below 10. Usually below 10, you start to see a shift in color. So I can see a visual shift in color here, and that's at about 5%, 5 to 6%. So that's pretty good. All right, next thing to talk about in terms of the hardware is the interface, and the interface is fantastically simple to use. It's got a full color screen so you can see what you're doing, and a very simple button layout. You've got a menu button which enables you to get into the menu and simply scroll around and select what it is you want to change. If you've selected the wrong thing in the menu, you can press the back button and go backwards. If you want to get out of the menu altogether, you can just hit the mode button and you're out of the menu system, so pretty straightforward. In terms of saving things, it's really simple because the unit actually has instructions on screen. So down the bottom there it says long press preset to save. So let's press down and see what happens. But before we do that, let's put a change in. Let's go 10,000 Kelvin. That's pretty obvious to recognize. Long press of the preset button. And do I want to save this as save 3? Yes. And as simple as that, it's saved. Now, if I want to do recalls, that's really simple. I just press preset and up comes all my saves. Now, I'm not sure how many things I can save here. Let's have a look. We can save 20 settings. Now, one thing I really like about this thing compared to other lights is when you're scrolling through your saves, it actually previews them. Okay, so let's scroll down. So you can actually see what your saves look like. If you can't remember the numbers, for example, you can just visually get a cue. All right, so let's talk about the CCT mode. How straightforward is this? So basically, the one knob controls our dimming, and it dims in 0.1 increments. The center knob controls our CCT, or our color temperature. We've got a range from 2,700 up to 10,000, okay? And that's adjustable in 50 Kelvin increments. And we've also got our plus minus green. And as you can see, visual indexing, so you can visually see what's going on with this beautiful color screen. One thing I don't like about the unit is it doesn't have notches on the buttons. They're free rolling. So what I don't like about that is I get the shakes in my fingers. So I have a very hard time, say I'm adjusting the plus minus green here, I have a very hard time with my shaky hands getting my fingers off the knobs without the setting changing. So see it change there? Let's get it back to 0. It's a fair bit of effort for me to do that just because I've got shaky hands, but if you've got steady hands, that won't affect you one bit. Now let's have a look at the next mode, and to change modes you simply press the mode button, and the next mode is called skin tone. Basically your skin tone mode is your CCT mode or your white light mode with a fancy graphic and different words. So just to emphasize that, I use the center button to adjust the dot this way, forward and backwards. That's called softness. So basically, as you can see, that's your CCT. So down here is your cool whites, up the other end is your warm whites. So basically it's your CCT. Now if I adjust it up and down using the other knob, which is called freshness, that's basically your plus minus green. So this mode is pretty much just CCT, or your white light mode, with a fancier name and a graphic on it. But I'm going to give them credit where credit is due. I've got a lot of rental clients who just don't comprehend CCT. So I think a visual representation like this would pretty much help them a fair bit when it comes to finding the correct color balance on the light. Now let's have a look at our next mode, which is HSI. So just press the mode button to select that. HSI stands for hue, saturation and intensity. Now this mode is very simple to use because of the graphic interface. So the one knob here adjusts my brightness. The second knob adjusts my hue angle. So for those people who have always wondered what hue angle is, now you can visually see it. Okay, and the next knob across adjusts my saturation, how much white light I mix in. So you've got a really good graphical visual representation of what is going on here. This is fantastic. So this is going to make this mode so much easier for people to comprehend. Now one thing to point out is in the center, when you're fully desaturated to white, it is desaturating to the HSI D65 standard, which means it's desaturating to 6,500 Kelvin. And it is not an RGB mix. It is actually using its white color emitters. So this is a proper full-on HSI mode. Now the next mode is gels mode. So basically in the gels mode, when you get to your home page here, the silver knob is your brightness and the center knob selects your CCT base. So basically whether you're on a 3200 Kelvin base or a 5600 Kelvin base, you can't dial in a CCT, at least not in this version of the firmware. Okay, now if you want to get to your gels list, basically follow the on-screen instructions, which tell you to press the back button. Now when you get to this menu, the silver knob basically scrolls up and down the list of gels that are currently displayed. The center knob selects the brand of gel, whether you're looking at Roscoe brand or Lee brand. Okay, and then the third knob across basically selects the family or series of gels that you're looking at. So I haven't done a count, but I'm guessing there must be at least 350 to 380 gels here. So basically let's go through, scroll through the Lee colors. Now there is one fault in the firmware, and that is some of the red gels actually go to black. So let's have a scroll through. Where are we? There we go. Bright red is turned off. So I've noticed a few of the bright reds go to black, but hopefully that's just a firmware glitch that they can fix. But very impressive that it's got such a massive gels library. Now the next mode is source matching. So basically a source matching mode is a whole stack of pre-programmed lights. So things like candle light, high pressure sodium street lights, pretty much every sort of light you can imagine is pre-programmed into here. Things like glow sticks, for example, all those sort of wacky things are already in here. So basically in the home page menu here, the silver knob is your brightness. Okay, the center knob selects the category of light that you're looking at. So at the moment we've got incandescent, fluorescent, discharge or other. So let's go to discharge. Okay. Now the end knob selects the light that's in that family that you're looking at. So at the moment it's set to HMI, high pressure sodium. This is something I use a lot. I use high pressure sodiums and low pressure sodiums a fair bit to simulate street lights, so that comes in handy. Particularly say you're doing a factory scene, you want an industrial light coming through the windows at night. I love the sodiums. So basically that's this mode in a nutshell. Now if you find this a confusing system to use, or you just want to see the options that are available, If you press the back button, that gives you a menu system. So I'll just get everything across to the one side. So the silver knob scrolls up and down your currently selected list. Okay, and the center knob changes the categories. So as you can see here, there's a lot of light sources that are programmed in here, a huge amount. Next is the effects mode, and the unit has 12 built-in effects. So this is the fire effects mode, and it's okay, but it's not as good as, say, the effects on the sky panel. And I think a lot of the lights, the effects really do show how superior the processing power of the sky panel is compared to other panel lights. So this sort of looks all right, but when you speed it up, you can see that it's quite steppy, and it just looks, it looks artificial. It doesn't feel like a real fire effect to me, whereas on the sky panel, it's got that roll off on the flicker, and you've got the two light engines working separately, giving you flame licks. So is that a big deal? Maybe not for you, but for me, that's a bit of a problem, because I do use the fire effect a lot, particularly campfire scenes, or pretty much anything, let's say a period drama set prior to electricity. I use the sky panel fire effects a heck of a lot. I have come to rely on them. Okay, now let's get into using the menu here. So the silver button is basically your dimmer, or if you press the button, it brings up other options that are in the in that effect. The center knob is your speed, and the right knob is play, pause, and stop. Okay, so if you press the back button, you get the list of effects. So there are 12 effects. We'll go to cop car. Cop car is not too bad, or police light as they call it, and we'll select that. Now, if I press the back button, that gets me, sorry, not the back button. If I press the silver button, that gets me into my options. So I can select whether it's blue flashing light only, red flashing light only, red or blue, blue and white, red, blue, white, so on and so forth. Let's go to red and blue. And the other option I've got is pulses. So I can select whether it's a single pulse, a double pulse, a triple pulse, a quad pulse. So 4 pulses is pretty much the Australian sort of standard. So the police lights is pretty good. Let's go back and have a look through. I'm just going to select something now to show the limitations that this has. So let's have a look at club lights. Let's select that. Let's go into options. Basically, you can select how many colors you've got, and you can select whether it's things, the saturation, whether it's a flicker or a pulse. But if you have a look at that, it just sort of lacks the finesse that the sky panels have, where they flash and they dim and they pulse and all sorts of things. It just seems to lack that finesse that you have in your effects. But it does have quite a big list of effects. So look, I'm sure there's enough effects there to get you out of trouble, but if you're looking for a unit that has effects equal to the sky panel, this isn't it. And I haven't come across any other light that does equal the sky panel yet. Now, the last mode to talk about is your RGB WW mode, where basically all your individual channels, you can select and dial values into them. So not really a lot to talk about here. Pretty standard mode on most RGB and RGB WW lights. I've got to say though, it's a mode I don't think I've ever used on set. All right, before we go any further, I better mention that the light does have phone app capability, but at the time I'm filming this, the phone app is not yet released. So anyway, let's have a look at the snap bag and see if it's any good. Now it does have a nice high quality silver reflective material in here. Very strong, made of a grit cloth, so it won't rip or tear easily. Okay, so now we've got a nice big soft source, nice big aperture there. Let's have a look around the back and see if we get any light leakage. Okay, so pretty well contained. Now, of course, one problem you're going to have is tilting it. You're not really going to get past here. They do have a mount onto the back, but that looks like it would be a little bit difficult to use. All right, let's see how this thing goes with the grid on. Now, it's not a snap grid, so it will take a little bit longer to put on than the SkyPanel units. So it looks to me like it's probably about a 30-degree grid. Just having a look at the shape of it. All right, let's fire it up and see what difference the grid makes. All right, so let's have a look through the menu system. Okay, so you press menu to get into the menu, and the first thing that comes up on your menu is light control. So let's click on that, and the first thing up is your light mode. So that's basically just a list of your light modes when you go into there. So let's not go through all that again. The next thing down is your dimmer curve. So let's hit that. You've got a choice of linear, exponential, logarithmic, or curve. So nothing groundbreaking there. Okay. The next thing down in the main menu is your network settings. So that's things like your DMX and Ethernet and USB. So let's go into there. First up is DMX settings. So let's go into DMX settings. DMX address, that's pretty straightforward. Okay, the next one down, DMX work mode. So let's click on that and have a look. That's your master and slave mode. So this thing does have master and slave mode capability. So that's very handy. If you don't know what that is, basically you can have multiple of these lights, hook them all together with a DMX cable, and you can run them as one unit. Okay, so that's a very handy thing to have. I use that quite a bit. Let's back out of here. The next thing down is your DMX protocols list. So let's select that. It's got a huge list of professional protocols. Very good protocol options in there. One thing I would suggest that they need to put in is a very, very, very primitive protocol. All of these are top-end professional protocols, but I think a primitive protocol, something like channel 1 for color temperature, channel 2 for dimmer, and that's it. I think that'd be a handy thing to have in here, because I think a lot of people buying this will be people buying it as an entry-level, high-output RGB WW light. It might be the first one they get. They probably don't have thousands of dollars of DMX kit. So I think they might be using a basic slider desk. I think it'd be nice to have a basic DMX protocol in there for those guys. Let's go back. The next thing is DMX signal loss behavior. So this thing is important. A lot of lights don't have this in the menu systems, and they should have them in the menu systems. Your choices are hold last command. So what that means is if your DMX gets disconnected, the cable gets crunched, whatever, for whatever reason, the signal stops coming to the light will hold its last command. And that is the thing I always have my light set to, because I do a lot of live to air TV. If my signal gets disconnected, I want the light to stay on. The next option down is blackout. So basically the light turns off if it loses DMX. And then your third option is hold and then fade to black after 2 minutes. So that's all of the DMX. The next thing down in the network settings is Ethernet. That doesn't seem to do anything. And the next one after that, option number 3, is your USB. And that basically enables you to choose whether the USB receives data or is used as a disk drive. Now, the third lot of options in the menu system are the system settings. So let's have a look in there. So you've got display settings. The next thing down is language. I'm not going to go in there in case I accidentally change the language, and I'll explain why in a minute. Okay, beneath language settings is your fan modes. So you've got a choice of automatic. So let's just hit that. Okay, so I've had the fans turned off for a bit. You've got mid-speed, full speed, and off. Let's turn these back off. Okay, the next thing down is firmware update. So it is firmware updatable. That's awesome. And here's a big problem with the menu system. Number 5 in this menu is factory reset. So here's my problem with factory reset being here. Factory reset, in my opinion, should be on the bottom of the menu homepage. That's where it is on everyone else's lights. And I'm going to tell you from experience why it's there. If somebody went into the menu system and changed the language, okay, I would need an interpreter to find where factory reset is. I'd need someone who can read Cantonese, Korean, Italian, whatever language it gets changed into. I'd need to find someone who can read it so they can go through find system settings and then scroll down and find factory reset. I'd never find it by myself. So I think that's in a bad position. I think they need to change that in a firmware update. Okay, and the next thing down is a data file update. So that's pretty much that. The last thing on the menu system is system info. So we'll click on that. Okay, fixture status. Basically, if you've got a warning light, so if that status light was flashing red, you'd go to fixture status, click on that, and it will tell you what the fault is. Okay, the next thing down is temperature. So let's click on there. So like a lot of modern lights, this thing has thermostats in it. So it's telling me the temperature of the drivers and the LED light engine. So you're probably thinking that's interesting information. Where would I use it? It is very handy information to have, particularly if you're trying to figure out how to make a shroud or a waterproof cover. That information is important because you want to know if you're overheating the light. So you can figure that out when you're designing your rain cover, instead of being on set and 2 hours later the light turns off because it's overheated. So that's very important information to have at your fingertips. Let's back out of here. Next is system clock, so you can set time and day in the menu system. Fixture number, that's basically the serial number. So gone are the days where someone can just file off the serial number and steal the light. The serial number is in the firmware. Firmware version, so that you can figure out if you need a firmware update. And the next thing down is runtime counter. All right, before we get into the technical review, I'm just going to explain my categories. So when I refer to warm white, that's anything below 4,000 Kelvin. Mid whites is 4,000 to 5,000 Kelvin, and cool whites is 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. All right, let's start off by having a look at our CCT, our color temperatures, how accurately this unit dials in a color temperature. In your warm whites, you're looking at a typical accuracy of plus or minus 17 Kelvin. In your mid whites, you're looking again at 17 Kelvin plus or minus accuracy. And in your cool whites, you're looking at a plus or minus 19 Kelvin. Now let's have a look at our average hue, which is plus minus green, and we're going to be measuring this in DUV increments. Now, to give you some idea of scale, 24 increments of DUV is the equivalent of a 1/8 correction gel. Okay, in our warm whites, the light is typically out on average by plus or minus 3 DUV increments. In the mid whites, it's typically over by plus 9 DUV increments, and in the cool whites, it's typically over on average by plus 7 DUV increments. Now, before we get into the color render scores, let's have a quick look at this spectrum analysis. As you can see here, there are quite a few dips. So when you get a light like this, you can have varying scores depending on what measurement system you're using. So this light, for example, has very high CRI scores. Its color vector testing scores are pretty healthy, but its TLCI scores are really, really low. So let's get into it. So let's start off with TLCI, Television Lighting Consistency Index. Now, in the warm whites, the average score was a lousy 84.7. Now, to give you the highs and lows of that, the lowest score I came across was 79, and that was at 2,700 Kelvin, and the highest score was 89. In the mids, in the mid whites, it scores on average 90.1, with a low score of 88 and a top score of 92. In the cool whites, it scores a 93.6. Now, in terms of color vector testing results, which gives you a more accurate indication because this looks at 99 test colors evenly spaced around the color vector. In the warm whites, this light was scoring 92.4, which is a very good score, with a 102% color saturation average. In the mid whites, it was scoring a 92, which is a good score, with a 101% average saturation. And in the cool whites, it was scoring 91.4, with an average saturation again of 101%. Now let's take a closer look at our more commonly used kelvins. When I dialed in 3,200 Kelvin, I got 3,210 with a TLCI score of 86. However, the CRI score was much higher at 95.8. Note that R9, R11 and R12 are quite low. TM30 colour testing reveals a more accurate score would be 93% colour rendition with a 102% saturation. Here is the spectrum distribution graph. Notice the dips. And it had an extremely accurate white point with a deviation of only 0.0001 DUV. When I dialed in 4400 Kelvin, I got 4442 with a TLCI score of 90. However, the CRI score was 96.6 with a low R9 and R12. TM30 colour vector analysis reveals a more accurate score would be 92% colour rendition with a 101% saturation. Here is the spectrum distribution. There is a noticeable dip between the blue and the green. And the white point accuracy was quite good with a DUV variation of only 8 increments. When I dialed in 5600 Kelvin, I got 5641 with a TLCI score of 94. The CRI score was 96.6 and only R12 was low. TM30 colour vector testing reveals a more accurate score would be 91% with 101% colour saturation. Here is the spectrum distribution and it looks very similar to top of the line RGBW units from 3 years ago. And the white point was quite accurate at 10 DUV increments out. Now let's have a look at the hue and saturation accuracy of the colours. The primary colours, red, green and blue, are all smack on target. Red came in exactly on 0, green came in exactly on 120 degrees, and blue came in exactly on 240. Yellow, which should be 60 degrees, came in at 22. Now this is an interesting one to look at. This is a very solid graph. Cyan, which should be 180, came in at 223, and magenta, which should be 300 degrees, came in pretty close at 314. Now let's look at the colours with 50% saturation, and it's worth pointing out that this light desaturates to the D65 standard. Red, which should be 0, came in at 358 degrees with 44% saturation. Green, which should be 120 degrees, came in very close at 126 with 51% saturation. Blue, which should be 240, came in at 243 degrees with 83% saturation. Yellow, which should be 60, came in at 24 with 71% saturation. Cyan, which should be 180, came in at 222 degrees with 61% saturation. And magenta, which should be 300, came in at 309 with 61% saturation. So there you go. If you can't afford sky panels and you're after something with the same firepower and RGB capabilities, this might be what you're looking for. And the color render is arguably as good as the sky panels. Now bear in mind with that, that is not a huge compliment on this unit. The sky panels are actually quite an old light engine now. So I'd be quite interested to see what the Thunder One Pro can do, because that's meant to have even better color render. So just a reminder, they also have these coming in different sizes soon. So this might be something that is worth thinking about. I'm Andrew Locke. See you on the next episode of Gaffer and Gear.